Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we continue Journal Collection number 34 by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and we are up to April 10th. And with that, I will go ahead and read that entry. April 10th. The slowly retreating snow blocks the roads and wood paths and shuts me in the house. But yesterday the warm south wind drew me to the top of the hill like the dove from the ark, to see if the white waters were abated, and there was place for the foot. The grass springs up already between the holes in the snow, and I walked along the knolls and edges of the hill wherever the winter bank was melted, but I thrust my cane into the bank 2 feet perpendicular. I greeted the well-known pine grove, which I could not reach. The pine tops seemed to cast a friendly gold-green smile of acquaintance toward me, for it was in my heart that I had not yet quite got home from my late journey until I had revisited and rejoined these vegetable demons. The air was kind and clear. The sky southward was full of comets, so white and fan-shaped and ethereal lay the clouds, as if the late visit of this foreign wonder had set the fashion for the humbler meteors. And all around me the new-come sparrows, robins, bluebirds, and blackbirds were announcing their arrival with great spirit. The transcendentalist or realist is distinguished from the churchman herein that he limits his affirmation to his perception and never goes beyond the warrant of his experience, spiritual and sensuous, in his creed, whilst the churchman affirms many things received on testimony as of equal value with the moral intuitions. I told Mr. Means that he need not consult the Germans, but if he wished at any time to know what the transcendentalist believed, he might simply omit what in his own mind he added from the tradition, and the rest would be transcendentalism. The Church affirms this and the fact of time and place, describes circumstances, a circumstantial heaven, a circumstantial hell. The way of the Spirit is different. It never antedates its revelations. It does not tell you when or how, but it says, "Be thus and thus." And in our doing, it opens the path, shines in the way we are to go, and creates around us new unpredicted relations. Daniel Webster is a great man with a small ambition. Nature has built him and holds him forth as a sample of the heroic mold to this puny generation. He was virtual President of the United States from the hour of the speech on Foote's resolutions in the United States Senate in 1832, being regarded as the expounder of the Constitution and the defender of law. But this did not suffice. He wished to be an officer also, wished to add a title to his name and be a president. That ruined him. He should have learned from the Chinese that, quote, "It has never been the case that when a man in a place where no mulberry trees yet grew could cause the aged to wear silks, and where there were no breeders of fowls or hogs or sheep could cause the aged to eat flesh, and the young did not suffer hunger or cold, he did not become emperor." The drop of nectar. In nature, the woodness, or tendency to make an idle savage and idiot of a man through the seduction of forests, mountains, and waters, is a conspicuous example of the bias of small excess of force which is always added in the vital directions. Buddhism. Winter, night, sleep are all the invasions of eternal Buddha, and it gains a point every day. Let be laissez-faire, so popular now in philosophy and in politics, that is bald Buddhism, and then very fine names has it got to cover up its chaos withal, namely trances, raptures, abandonment, ecstasy, all Buddha naked Buddha. Traveling forsooth, as if every traveler did not feel himself an impertinence when he came among the diligent in their places. Do you suppose there is any country where they do not scald the milk pans and clout the infants and burn the brushwood? And yet Humboldt may travel, or any other man, when the state seems to travel in his legs, as these railway levelers whom I met this afternoon. Nature is the strictest economist. Ellen wishes to know if she may come and see when the railroad goes by. Father, what makes the railroad grow worse? I said she must come in, for it was damp, and she would get sick, and I could not spare my little daughter. She answered, Could you not spare her to God? It is a compensation for the habitual moderation of nature in these conquered fields and the want of picturesque outlines, the ease of getting about. I long sometimes to have mountains, ravines, and flumes like that in Lincoln, New Hampshire, within reach of my eyes and feet. But the thickets of the forest and the fatigue of mountains are spared me, and I go through Concord as through a park. Concord is a little town, and yet has its honors. We get our handful of every ton that comes to the city. We have had our share of Everett and Webster, who have both spoken here. So has Edward Taylor. So did George Bancroft and Bronson Alcott and Charles Lane and Garrison and Phillips, the abolition orators. We have had our shows and processions, conjurers and beer gardens, and here, too, came Herr Dreisbach with his cats and snakes, lying down on a lioness, and kissing a tiger, and rolling himself up, not in leopard skins, but in live leopards, and his companion with his tippet of anacondas. Hither come in summer the Penobscot Indians, and make baskets for us on the river bank. Dr. Channing and Harriet Martineau were here, and what I think much more, here was Aunt Mary, Ellen, Edward, and Charles. Here is Elizabeth Hoare. Here have been, or are, Margaret Fuller, Sam and Anna Ward, Caroline Sturgis, Charles Newcomb, George Bradford, Ellery Channing, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Sarah Alden Ripley, Henry Thoreau, James Elliott Cabot. In the old time, John Winthrop, John Eliot, Peter Buckley, then Whitefield, then Hancock, Adams, and the college were here in 1775. Note from the editor. Mr. Emerson, years later, added the following. Kossuth spoke to us in the courthouse in 1852. Agassiz, Greenough, Clough, Jeffreys, Wyman, Samuel Hoare, Lafayette. April 17th. How sincere and confidential we can be, saying all that lies in the mind, and yet go away feeling that we have spun a rope of sand, that all is yet unsaid, from the incapacity of the parties to know each other, although they use the same words. Could they but once understand that I loved to know that they existed, and heartily wished them Godspeed, yet out of my poverty of life and thought had no word or welcome for them when they came to see me, and could well consent to their living in another town. From any claim that I felt on them, it would be great satisfaction. Not this, but something like this, I said, and then, as the discourse, as so often, touched character, I added that they were both intellectual. They assumed to be substantial and central to be the thing they said, but were not. But only intellectual or the scholars, the learned of the spirit or central life. If they were that, if the centers of their life were coincident with the center of life, I should bow the knee. I should accept without gainsaying all that they said, as if I had said it, just as our saint, though morbid, Jones Very had affected us with what was best in him. But I felt in them the slight dislocation of these centers, which allowed them to stand aside and speak of these facts knowingly. Therefore, I was at liberty to look at them, not as the commanding fact, but as one of the whole circle of facts. They did not like pictures, marbles, woodlands, and poetry. I liked all these, and Lane and Alcott too, as one figure more in the various landscape. And now, I said, will you not please to pound me a little before I go, just by way of squaring the account, that I may not remember that I alone was saucy? Alcott contented himself with quarreling with the injury done to greater qualities in my company by the tyranny of my taste, which certainly was very soft pounding, and so I departed from the divine lotus eaters. Veracity. Almost every writing of a liberal kind, when at last it is done, assumes the air of an escapade. It is done to get rid of it, done for editors, booksellers, and all miscellaneous occasions, and not out of a dire or divine intrinsic necessity. So much deduction from veracity. Intellectual race are the New Englanders. Mrs. Ripley at Brook Farm said that the young women who came thither from farms elsewhere would work faithfully and do whatever was given them without grumbling, but there was no heart in it, but their whole interest was in their intellectual culture. Open the mouth of the cave, and bring out those 5 kings unto me out of the cave. Joshua 10:22 was Dr. Frothingham's text on the 5 points of Calvinism. Carlyle esteems all living men mice and rats, but that is one of the conditions of his genius. Take away that feeling, and you would possibly make him dumb. Carlyle, in his new book, as everywhere, is a continuer of the great line of scholars in the world, of Horace, Varro, Pliny, Erasmus, Scaliger, Milton, and well sustains their office in ample credit and honor. If the good heaven have any truth to impart, there he is at his post, a fit organ to say it well. Not a prophet, not a poet, but a master of that cunning art which can clothe any fact with a fine robe of words. Nature gives me precious signs in such persons as William Tappan, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and now eminently in L.M.W., that in democratic America she will not be democratized, how cloistered and constitutionally sequestered from the market and gossips. Second Advent. I read of an excellent Millerite who gives out that he expects the second advent of the Lord in 1843, but if there is any error in his computation, he shall look for him until he comes. The hurts of the husbandman are many. As soon as the heat bursts his vine seed and the cotyledons open, the striped yellow bugs and the stupid squash bug, smelling like a decomposing pear, sting the little plants to death and destroy the hope of melons. And as soon as the grass is well cut and spread on the ground, the thunder clouds, which are the bugs of haymakers, come growling down the heaven and make tea of his hay. We cannot forgive you that worst want of tact which incapacitates you from discriminating between what is to be disputed and what is to be reverenced or cherished in your friends' communications. The babe of a Choctaw, the cub of a lion, may be strangled by a boy, and the ablest genius, if he trust you with his yet unripe fancies, casts himself helpless on your compassion. Life and death are in your hands. Let his power and renown be what they may. There is no part then to be taken but to throw yourself as much as possible into the neutral state of mind and entertain his thought as far as you can, and where you cannot, be satisfied that you cannot, without criticism. It is, though you can kill it, the babe of a Choctaw, the cub of a lion, and will yet approve its sinewy stock. I wrote to Thomas Carlyle of his new book, Past and Present. I went to Washington and spent 4 days. The 2 poles of an enormous political battery, galvanic coil on coil, self-increased by series on series of plates from Mexico to Canada and from the sea westward to the Rocky Mountains, here terminate and play and make the air electric and violent. Yet one feels how little, more than how much, man is represented there. I think in the higher societies of the universe it will turn out that the angels are molecules as the devils were always titans, since the dullness of the world needs such mountainous demonstration and the virtue is so modest and concentrating. May 2nd. Yesterday I read an old file of Aunt Mary's letters and felt how she still gains by all comparison with later friends. Never any grave higher counsels, as Elizabeth Hoare most truly said, nor played with all the household incidents with more wit and humor. My life and its early events never looked trivial in her letters, but full of eyes and acquired deepest expression. In America, out of doors all seems a market, indoors an airtight stove of conventionalism. Everybody who comes into the house savors of these precious habits, the men of the market, the women of the custom. In every woman's conversation and total influence, mild or acid, lurks the conventional devil. They look at your carpet, they look at your cap, at your salt cellar, at your cook and waiting maid, conventionally to see how close they square with the customary cut in Boston and Salem and New Bedford. But Aunt Mary and Elizabeth do not bring into a house with them a platoon of conventional devils. May 7th. Yesterday George Bradford walked and talked to the community and cleared up some of the myths which gossip had made, and expressed the conviction, shared by himself and his friends there, that plain dealing was the best defense of manners and morals between the sexes. I suppose that the danger arises whenever bodily familiarity grows up without a spiritual intimacy. The reason why there is purity in marriage is that the parties are universally near and helpful, and not only near bodily. If their wisdoms come near and meet, there is no danger of passion. Therefore, the remedy of impurity is to come nearer. Many events on the light-winged hours. Alcott and Lane make ready to depart. Channing has brought his layers to Concord, and Henry Thoreau is gone yesterday to New York, whence come the warm south winds. At Brook Farm, this peculiarity that there is no head. In every family a paterfamilias, in every factory a foreman, in a shop a master, in a boat a boatswain, but in Brook Farm no authority, but each master and mistress of their own actions, happy, hapless, sansculottis. Yesterday English visitors and I waited all day when they should go. If we could establish the rule that each man was a guest in his own house, and when we had shown our visitors the passages of the house, the way to fire, to bread and water, and thus made them as much at home as the inhabitant, did then leave them to the accidents of intercourse, and went about our ordinary business, a guest would no longer be formidable. At Brook Farm again, I understand the authority of Mr. and Mrs. Ripley is felt unconsciously by all, and this is ground of regret to individuals who see that this particular power is thrown into the conservative scale. But Mr. and Mrs. Ripley are the only ones who have identified themselves with the community. They have married it, and they are it. The others are experimenters who will stay by this if it thrives, being always ready to retire, but these have burned their ships and are entitled to the moral consideration which this position gives. The young people agree that they have had more rapid experiences than elsewhere befell them, have lived faster. May 10th. This morning sent away LMW's manuscript with some regret that my wildflowers must ever go back. Their value is a relief from literature, these unhackneyed fresh drafts from the source of sentiment and thought, far, far from shop and market, or the aim at effect. It is read as we read an age of polish and criticism, the first lines of written prose and verse in a nation. George Bradford yesterday dug with me in the swamp his young larches, and we sat with the sphagum and the budding coptis and the blooming white violet sweet-scented. He talks happily of his new friends, but it is not enough that people should be intelligent and interested in themselves. They must also make me feel that they have a controlling, happy future opening before them and inevitably bright, and brightening their present hour. Edward Lowell and Charles Emerson suggested their promise in their salutation or in the least transaction. Freedom is frivolous beside the tyranny of our genius. The blue sky in the zenith is the point in which romance and reality meet. If we should be rapt away into all that we dream of heaven, and should converse with Gabriel, Michael, Uriel, the blue sky would be all that would remain of our furniture. I have written this or the like of this somewhere else, I know not where. Ellery has reticency, Carlyle has not. How many things this book of Carlyle gives us to think! It is a brave grappling with the problem of the times, no luxurious holding aloof, as is the custom of men of letters, who are usually bachelors and not husbands in the state, but literature here has thrown off his gown and descended into the open lists. The gods are come among us in the likeness of men. An honest Iliad of English woes. Who is he that can trust himself in the fray? only such as cannot be familiarized, but nearest seen and touched is not seen and touched, but remains inviolate, inaccessible, because a higher interest, the politics of a higher sphere, bring him here and environ him, as the ambassador carries his country with him. Love protects him from profanation. What a book this is in relation to English privileged estates! Gulliver among the Lilliputians. This book comes so near to life and men that one can hardly help looking ahead a little and inquiring whether this strong brain will always be shut up in a scholar's library, whether the most intelligent Englishman will nourish no ambition to do that which he describes, and when the hour comes that these volleys of pungent counsels shall have got thoroughly sunk into the ear and heart of the population, and the population is Carlyle's, whether our vigorous Samson will not have a ruler's part to play. Yet nobody, neither law sergeant nor newspaper, yet cries Cromwell. A Londoner must exaggerate the social problem. Brook Farm again. The freaks of the young philosophers show how much life they have, as jockeys, when a horse rolls on the ground, add a gold eagle to his price for every turn he makes. But nothing will take the place of fidelity. The final result will be the same to Mrs. Ripley and the true workers. Yet one would fain to say the dear youths that pride and bearing will serve for a year or two, but are serpents' eggs, and will end in serpents, though they look now like alabaster and the egg of Jove's eagle. That God has suffered us to be represented in genius, but in virtue we must appear in person. Brook Farm will show a few noble victims who act and suffer with temper and proportion, but the larger part will be slight adventurers and will shirk work. May 18th. I set out yesterday by the hands of Cyrus Warren, 19 young pine trees west of my house and 4 in the triangle. I never see a quite unmusical character. Beautiful results are everywhere lodged. All intercourse is random and remote, yet what fiery and consoling friendships we have. The ideal journeying always with us, the heaven without rent or seam. We never know while the days pass which day is valuable. The surface is vexation, but the serene lies underneath. Nature lives by making fools of us all, adds a drop of nectar to every man's cup. Machinery and transcendentalism agree well. Stagecoach and railroad are bursting the old legislation like green withes. My garden is an honest place. Every tree and every vine are incapable of concealment, and tell after 2 or 3 months exactly what sort of treatment they have had. The sower may mistake and sow his peas crookedly. The peas make no mistake, but come up and show his line. No matter how long you are silent, silence is only postponement. The retained thought takes a softer form. You must hear the bird sing without attempting to render it into verbs and nouns. Let it lie a while, and at night you shall find you have transferred its expression into the history of the day. Our American lives are somewhat poor and pallid. Franklin's and Washington's, no fiery grain. Staid men, like our pale and timid Flora. We have too much freedom, need an austerity, need some iron girth. The poets, the great, have been illustrious wretches who have beggared the world which has beggared them. Work on. The bee works all day, all summer, not knowing whom he fights for until the hive is full. Then comes a higher being, man, and takes the store. As long as you feel the veracity of reading, read in God's name, asking no questions of why and where to. By and by, some man or men, a continent, or perhaps a higher sphere of beings will be served by you. May 19th. A youth of the name of Ball, a native, as he told me, of Concord, came to me yesterday, who towered away in such declamatory talk that at first I thought it rhodomade, and we should soon have done with each other. But he turned out to be a prodigious reader and writer, too, for he spoke of whole volumes of prose and poetry barreled away, and discovered great sagacity and insight in his criticisms, a great impatience of our straight New England ways, and a wish to go to the Ganges, or at least to live in Greece and Italy. There was little precision in his thinking, great discontent with metaphysics, and he seemed of a musical rather than a mathematical structure. With a little more repose of thought, he would be a great companion. He thought very humbly of most of his contemporaries, and Napoleon he thought good to turn periods with, but that he could see through him. But Lord Bacon he could not pardon for not seeing Shakespeare, for, said he, as many Lord Bacons as could stand in Concord could find ample room in Shakespeare's brain. And Pope's mean thought and splendid rhetoric, he thought, resembled rats' nests and kings' closets made up in a crown and purple robe and regalia. He knows Greek well and reads Italian, German, and Spanish. He spent 5 hours with me and carried off a pile of books. He had never known but one person of extraordinary promise, a youth at Dartmouth of the name of Hobart. Critical. Do not write modern antiques like Landor's Pericles, or Goethe's Iphigenia, or Wieland's Abderides, or Coleridge's Ancient Mariner, or Scott's Lay of the Last Minstrel. They are paste jewels. You may well take an ancient subject where the form is incidental merely, like Shakespeare's plays, and the treatment and dialogue is simple and most modern, but do not make much of the costume. For such things have no verity. No man will live or die by them. The way to write is to throw your body at the mark when your arrows are spent, like Cupid in Anacreon. Shakespeare's speeches in Lear are in the very dialect of 1843. High speech of Demiurgus to his gods in the Timaeus. Goethe's World Soul is a sequel of the same thought, and that does the intellect. It goes ordering, distributing, and by order making beauty. This creative vortex has not spun over London, over our modern Europe, until now in Carlyle. Humboldt is magnificent too, as a distributing eye. His glances stratification, geography of plants, etc. May 20th. Walked with Ellery, and the landscape felt the magic of color. The world is all opal, and those ethereal tints the mountains wear have the finest effects of music on us. Mountains are great poets, and one glance at this fine cliff scene undoes a great deal of prose, and reinstates us wronged men in our rights. All life, all society begins to get illuminated and transparent, and we generalize boldly and well. Space is felt as a great thing. There is some pinch and narrowness to us, and we laugh and leap to see the world and what amplitudes it has of meadow, stream, upland, forest, and sea, which are yet but lanes and crevices to the great space in which the world swims like a cockboat on the sea. A little canoe with 3 figures put out from a creek into the river and sailed downstream to the bridge, and we rejoiced in the blessed water, inviolable, magical, whose nature is beauty, which instantly began to play its sweet games, all circles and dimples and lovely gleaming motions, always Ganges, the sacred river, and which cannot be desecrated or made to forget itself. But there below are these farms, yet are the farmers unpoetic. The life of labor does not make men, but drudges. Pleasant it is, as the habits of all poets may testify, to think of great proprietors, to reckon this grove we walk in a park of the noble. But a continent cup all into 10-acre farms is not desirable to the imagination. The farmer is an enchanted laborer, and after toiling his brains out, sacrificing thought, religion, taste, love, hope, courage at the shrine of toil, turns out a bankrupt as well as the merchant. It is time to have the thing looked into, and with a transpiercing criticism settled whether life is worth having on such terms. Ellery said, "The village of Concord did not look so very bad from our point. The 3 churches looked like geese swimming about in a pond." All the physicians I have ever seen call themselves believers, but are materialists. They believe only in the existence of matter, and not in matter as an appearance, but as substance, and do not contemplate a cause. Their idea of spirit is a chemical agent. The stars, I think, the antidotes of Pyrrhonism. In the fuss of the sunlight and the rapid succession of moods, one might doubt his identity, but these expressive points, always in their place, so immutable, are the tranquilizers of men. No narcotic so sedative or sanative as this. Man sheds grief as his skin sheds rain, a preoccupied mind an immense protection. There is a great concession on all hands to the ideal decorum in grief as well as joy, but few hearts are broken. Edward Everett did long ago for Boston what Carlyle is doing now for England and Europe in rhetoricizing the conspicuous objects. Reform. Chang Tzu and Qi Ni retired from the state to the fields on account of misrule and showed their displeasure at Confucius, who remained in the world. Confucius sighed and said, "I cannot associate with birds and beasts. If I follow not man, whom shall I follow? If the world were in possession of right principles, I should not seek to change it." See the Four Books, translated from the Chinese by Reverend D. Collier, Malacca, 1828. Editor's note: here follow several extracts from the same work. End note. I enjoy all the hours of life. Few persons have such susceptibility to pleasure. As a countryman will say, I was at sea a month and never missed a meal. So I eat my dinner and sow my turnips, yet do I never, I think, fear death. It seems to me so often a relief, a rendering up of responsibility, a quittance of so many vexatious trifles. How poetic this wondrous web of property! J.P., sitting in his parlor talking of philanthropy, has his pocket full of papers representing dead labor done long ago, not by him, not by his ancestor, but by hands which his ancestor had skill to set at work and get the certificates of. And now these signs of the work of hands, long ago mouldered in the grave, are honored by all men, and for them J.P. can get what vast amounts of work done by new young hands. Canals, railways, houses, gardens, coaches, pastures, sheep, oxen, and corn. One great wrong must soon disappear, this right to burden the unborn with state loans. It is folly to imagine that there can be anything very bad in the position of woman compared with that of man at any time. For since every woman is a man's daughter, and every man is a woman's son, every woman is too near to man, was too recently a man, than that possibly any wide disparity can be. As is, the man will be the woman, and as is the woman, the man. It is greatest to believe and to hope well of the world, because he who does so quits the world of experience and makes the world he lives in. It is very odd that nature should be so unscrupulous. She is no saint. Luther said he, quote, preached coarsely that giveth content to all. Hebrew, Greek, and Latin I spare until we learned ones come together, and then we make it so curled and finical that God himself wondereth at us. End quote. Reform, people hate the sound of now that they have begun to think it is like reading novels, which, when they are done, leave them just where they were, carpenters and merchants, and debtors and poor ladies, only they disbelieved the novel, and believed at first the reformer. But with any faith that would give a new face to the world for poor old eyes, lank hair, and wrinkled brows, as Millerism and Fourierism and other of our superstitions attest. The smallest piece of God in a man makes him as attractive as lodestone. A scholar shines and immediately draws many youth around him, and if he have not God enough in him to know how to say no, he finds himself inconveniently attractive. The man, the God, is awakening. the door bolt will be broken, the iron fence melted in the forge. A man will yet measure his acres by his need and ability. I can manage 10 and do take 10. I 40 and take 40. I 100 and will farm 100. He will know how to stand in his garden and in his house as steward and say, "This is right that you should take, this is wrong, therefore leave it, O guest." And by his just standing there, as a channel of law and not of self, the human race will feel that they occupy it by his occupation, they are excluded in his departure. In the dreamy woods what forms abound, that elsewhere never poet found. Here voices ring and pictures burn, and grace on grace where'er I turn. In the dreaming woods I find that what is nowhere else, and pictures on pictures whithersoever I turn. Over our little God's pond the birds flitted spectrally. Nothing could look more Elysian and unreal. I think that at some parliament of beauty fire and water will contend for the apple which mistaken Paris gave, and it will be adjudged to neither but to animal, who is the child of both. For the red bird is fire, and the running horse is water. It is agreeable and picturesque to see a man drink water and eat bread, not so coffee and cake. It is not traveling, it is not residence, it is relations that make life, much or little. A few grand persons coming to us and weaving duties and offices between us and them shall make our bread ambrosial. But now it seems to me that I know persons enough of the first class, if only they were necessarily related. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 persons who look at nature and existence with no unworthy eye, but they are players, and rather melancholy players in the world for want of work. I have seen no one who wore on his face an expression of habitual energy, but rather of indolence. The great faculties lie idle, whilst the hands and feet bustle. We do not live by times, we do not belong to this or that century, but we live by qualities. A new style of face, a new person would be a new age and regeneration to us. Nature, a mountain walk, always gives us to suspect the poverty of life, and we believe that we have run along only one thread of experience out of millions of varied threads, which we were competent to combine with that single string of ours. Life must look forlorn if we have nothing above us. Paddy values life, and it looks solid to him, because he sees and feels so much and so many above him. It looks to us sad enough that not even a superstition should remain to us, no ghosts in the broad land and social system of millions, no play for the imagination of millions. And yet it has so appeared to all peoples, for no man knew his superstition as superstition. And we who lie under this enchantment of desiring money may find ours there, when we consider that the net result of the life which is bestowed on drudging for an estate, and of that which is merrily trifled away, does not much vary. The farmer, as we passed, was leading a small company of men in their Eleusinian mysteries along the furrows of the field. One step each, and then seeds were dropped, and the soil smoothed, and then another step, and no man lifted his face from the ground. This country must be filled with incident, and then how will the landscape look? Now our houses and towns are like mosses and lichens, so thin laid on the rock. One day they will get rooted like oaks, and be a part of the globe. I think we are not quite yet fit for flying machines, and therefore there will be none. The mountains and the horizon acquaint us with more exalted relations to our friends than any we sustain. Carlyle must write thus or nohow, like a drunken man who can run but cannot walk. What a man's book is that! No prudence, no compromises, but a thorough independence, a masterly criticism on the times. Fault perhaps the excess of importance given to the circumstance of today. The poet is here for this, to dwarf and destroy all merely temporary circumstance, and to glorify the perpetual circumstance of men, such as dwarf British debt and raised nature and social life. This is the end of part 2 of Emerson's journal collection number 34, dating from the year 1843, when the author was 40 years old. Thank you for listening.